blindfolded me, and then tied me, cut off my shirt, and told me to stay there naked.
50 plus rapes, murdered over a dozen people. He's this country's worst serial predator.
On a chilly December night in 1975, Officer McGowan patrolled a quiet neighborhood in Visalia, California. The darkness made him uneasy as he moved carefully between houses. Suddenly, he heard a noise and turned to see a person wearing a mask near one of the homes. McGowan fired his gun into the air as a warning. The strangers stopped moving and raised their hands, pleading with the officer not to shoot. As the person began to take off their mask, McGowan shined his flashlight to get a better look. However, this wasn't an ordinary burglar. It was someone with police and military experience. The masked individual had been waiting for the right moment. When McGowan focused on trying to see their face, the stranger quickly pulled out a weapon and fired. The shot struck McGowan's flashlight, causing pieces to fly into his eyes. As the dust settled on that fateful night, the Visalia Ransacker vanished into the darkness, leaving behind a trail of fear and unanswered questions. Little did anyone know, this encounter would mark the beginning of a far more sinister chapter in California's criminal history. In the years that followed, a series of brutal crimes would terrorize the state, perpetrated by a man who would come to be known as the Golden State Killer. Today we delve into the life of Joseph James DeAngelo, the man accused of being this infamous predator. Our investigation takes us from his early days of petty theft to the shocking evolution of his criminal career. The Golden State Killer's reign of terror spanned the 1970s and 80s, leaving a trail of devastation in its wake. Authorities believe he was responsible for at least 12 murders and 45 rapes. As we unravel this dark saga, we'll explore how one man managed to elude capture for decades, all while living a seemingly ordinary life. Joseph James DeAngelo's story begins in Bath, New York, where he was born into a family with a distinguished military background. His father, a World War II sergeant, and his uncle, a Purple Heart recipient, set a high bar for service and honor. However, beneath this veneer of respectability, a darker reality lurked. As we piece together DeAngelo's early years, a troubling picture emerges. Family members recount stories of domestic violence, with DeAngelo's father allegedly abusing his mother and children. These early experiences of trauma and violence would cast a long shadow over the young DeAngelo's life. One incident, in particular, stands out as a potential turning point. While stationed with his family at a German Air Force base, a young DeAngelo and his sister Constance ventured into an abandoned warehouse. What happened next in that warehouse would haunt DeAngelo and his sister for years to come. According to family accounts, two unknown airmen approached the children. In a horrifying turn of events, young Constance, only 7 years old, was reportedly sexually assaulted while DeAngelo watched helplessly. The trauma was compounded when, upon reporting the incident to their parents, the children were met with silence and a stern order to never speak of it again. This devastating experience aligns with patterns observed in the backgrounds of many violent offenders. The instability in DeAngelo's home life only intensified as he grew older. His parents' divorce and subsequent remarriages further fragmented his sense of family. When DeAngelo's father moved to Korea and started a new family, in what may have been an attempt to prove himself and gain his absent father's approval, DeAngelo enlisted in the Navy after high school in 1964. He served in Vietnam aboard the USS Canberra, following in his father's military footsteps. Upon returning home in 1967, he pursued higher education, studying criminal justice at Sierra College and later at Cal State Sacramento. During his college years, DeAngelo became engaged to Bonnie Jean Caldwell in 1972. While they appeared to be an ideal couple on the surface, Bonnie later revealed troubling aspects of their relationship, particularly regarding DeAngelo's sexual behavior. His insatiable appetite and unusual practices during intimacy hinted at deeper issues that would later manifest in far more sinister ways. The engagement ended abruptly when Bonnie broke it off, likely dealing dealing another blow to D'Angelo's already fragile sense of self. This rejection seems to have fueled his growing resentment towards women, a theme that would tragically recur throughout his life. Despite this setback, D'Angelo quickly entered into another relationship. He married Sharon Huddle, a 20-year-old law student, in November 1973. In 1973, D'Angelo's life took a significant turn when he joined the Exeter Police Department. However, this position of authority seemed to fuel a dark impulse within him. Around this time, reports began to surface of a mysterious figure peeping into windows in nearby Visalia. By 1974, these unsettling incidents had escalated into a series of break-ins and burglaries. The perpetrator, dubbed the Visalia Ransacker, followed a distinct pattern, entering homes, vandalizing property, and stealing personal items rather than valuables. Ironically, while these crimes were occurring, D'Angelo was assigned to the burglary detail in Exeter. The ransacker's activities reached a tragic climax in September 1975. During an attempted abduction of a 16-year-old girl, the intruder fatally shot her father, Claude Snelling, when he intervened. This shocking escalation prompted increased efforts to apprehend the suspect. In December 1975, a sting operation led to a confrontation between Detective McGowan and a masked prowler believed to be the ransacker. In a tense standoff, the suspect initially appeared to surrender, but then suddenly shot at McGowan, narrowly missing him, but destroying his flashlight. Fearing recognition, D'Angelo sought a fresh start. In May 1976, he secured a position with the Auburn Police Department, relocating with his wife, Sharon. To his colleagues, D'Angelo appeared unremarkable. Officer Nicholas Willick described him as an average Joe. However, retired officer Farrell Ward noted D'Angelo's serious demeanor, observing that he didn't quite fit in with the other officers. But beneath this ordinary facade, a sinister transformation was taking place. As night fell, on June 17, 1976, a new chapter in California's criminal history began. The East Area Rapist emerged, striking in Rancho Cordova. This marked the beginning of a reign of terror that would span years and cover a vast geographical area. The East Area Rapist's first known attack in Rancho Cordova revealed a meticulously planned and executed crime. The perpetrator employed stalking tactics, including drive-bys and hang-up calls, to gather intelligence on his victim. On the night of June 17, 1976, he struck with chilling precision. Entering the victim's home after cutting the phone line, the attacker, wearing a ski mask and gloves, confronted the woman in her bedroom. The assault that followed was brutal and traumatizing. Despite the attacker's efforts, the victim managed to call for help after he fled. This attack set a horrifying pattern that would be repeated numerous times across the Sacramento area in the months that followed. As news of these assaults spread, a wave of fear swept through the community. Residents took extreme measures to protect themselves, from arming themselves to changing locks and adopting guard dogs. The authorities dubbed this new threat the East Area Rapist, a name that would soon strike terror into the hearts of Californians. Despite the community's heightened vigilance and the increased police presence, the East Area Rapist continued to evade capture, leaving a trail of traumatized victims in his wake. Over the following months, the East Area Rapist's modus operandi became disturbingly clear. He targeted women who were alone or with young children, sometimes restraining the children before assaulting their mother. His attacks could last for hours, frequently interspersed with periods of ransacking the house. Victims reported chilling details of his behavior during these assaults. Some recalled him shouting, "I hate you, Bonnie," suggesting a lingering obsession with his ex-fiancée. Others described moments where he would break down, crying and calling out to his mother in a childlike manner. As the East Area Rapist's crime spree entered its third year, a disturbing evolution in his tactics became apparent. The initial thrill of his attacks seemed to wane, leading him to seek new ways to heighten his sense of danger and excitement. He expanded his hunting ground into the East Bay, west of Sacramento, targeting unfamiliar areas. In 1977, his methods took an even more sinister turn. No longer satisfied with attacking single women, he began targeting couples. His preparation became more brazen, sometimes involving direct contact with potential victims before an attack. In one chilling instance, he posed as a representative from a fictitious pet association, approaching a waitress's home in Citrus Heights to scout the premises. This bold move nearly backfired when the waitress grew suspicious of his behavior. She noticed him lingering by her garage and confirmed with a neighbor that he hadn't approached any other houses. Her instincts led her to contact the Better Business Bureau, which confirmed no such pet association existed in the area. The waitress's fears that night proved tragically justified. In May 1977, the East Area Rapist struck their Citrus Heights home, marking a chilling evolution in his criminal pattern. No longer content with targeting single women, he now set his sights on couples. The attack unfolded with terrifying precision. The couple awoke to find a masked figure looming over their bed. Under threat of death, he forced the woman to bind her husband, critically ensuring the restraints were tight. He then bound the woman and began a methodical search of their home, likely hunting for a trophy. What followed was a harrowing ordeal that demonstrated the attacker's complete control over the situation. He separated the couple, moving the woman to the living room while repeatedly threatening her husband. In a disturbing display of casualness, he even announced he was taking a break to have a beer. The East Area Rapist often took personal items from his victims, like photos and ID cards, which were never recovered. After attacking the waitress, D'Angelo continued his assaults. On February 2, 1978, while stalking a house in Rancho Cordova, Brian and Katie Maggiore saw him without his mask. Realizing who he was, they fled, but D'Angelo chased and shot them both. They died at the hospital, leaving the community in fear. Between 1974 and 1978, D'Angelo allegedly committed numerous ransackings, 27 rapes, and 3 murders. He was a notorious figure in the news, and authorities believed he followed media coverage, relishing the fear he caused. Carol Daly, an original investigator, remembered a community meeting during the East Area Rapist's crime spree. A local man criticized the police and the victims' husbands for not fighting back. Soon after, D'Angelo broke into this man's home and assaulted his wife. He often chose specific dates for his attacks, like his wedding anniversary, which seemed to trigger his violent behavior. His marriage was troubled, with neighbors recalling constant fights and separate bedrooms. D'Angelo's violence escalated after he was fired from the Auburn Police Department in 1979 for shoplifting. His former boss, Chief Nicholas Willick, described him as a poor officer who did the bare minimum. After his firing, Willick's daughter spotted a prowler outside their home, likely D'Angelo seeking revenge. However, the risk of attacking a trained cop might have deterred him. Studies suggest that perceived injustice in firing can lead to workplace violence. D'Angelo's resentment towards his boss for the firing likely fueled his rage, which he redirected into his criminal activities. The end of the 1970s marked a shift for the East Area Rapist. After the Maggiore murders in 1978, he felt Sacramento authorities closing in. His attacks moved further from home, and his violence increased. By late 1979, he decided not to leave any victims alive. On October 1st, 1979, a woman lay bound on her living room floor with her boyfriend tied up in the bedroom. The masked intruder rummaged through the kitchen, claiming he was only after money, but his calm demeanor hinted at something worse. She managed to free her wrists and fled, screaming for help. Neighbors' lights turned on as the masked man fled. She had escaped the Golden State Killer. Despite his crimes, D'Angelo led a seemingly average life as a cop. This phase of his criminal career saw him move to Southern California. For a year, he broke into homes in Visalia, earning the nickname Visalia Ransacker, until a close encounter with authorities in 1975. He then became a police officer in Auburn, while allegedly continuing his assaults as the East Area Rapist. By 1979, 29-year-old D'Angelo had committed countless ransackings, raped nearly 50 women, and killed 3 people across Northern California. His final attack in the East Bay was on June 25, 1979. Increased home security measures and armed homeowners likely drove him from his hunting grounds, compromising his ability to control his victims and taking the pleasure out of his crimes. Over the years, as the Golden State Killer's crimes became bolder, his choice of location remained the same. He preferred home invasions, relishing the intrusion into his victims' most intimate spaces. Despite the increased risk, risk, D'Angelo continued to break into homes. The psychological fulfillment he gained couldn't be met in any other way. However, the Gallegos abductions and murders heightened neighborhood vigilance and police presence in Sacramento, pushing D'Angelo to seek new territory. By September 1979, D'Angelo had targeted Goleta, a small coastal town near Santa Barbara, putting nearly 400 miles between him and his hometown. Fired from the Auburn Police Department, he likely took a job that allowed him to travel, such as a truck driver. This role gave him the perfect cover for frequent trips to Southern California. In September, D'Angelo carefully planned his first attack in Goleta. He selected his target, drew detailed maps of the neighborhood, and listed potential victims' names. His need for control and attention to detail were evident. Switching towns gave him a blank slate, and he knew police departments rarely communicated, allowing him to operate undetected. On October 1st, 1979, D'Angelo broke into a home on Queen Anne Lane. The couple awoke to a masked intruder shining a light in their faces. He demanded to know where they hid their money, making his victims believe he was only after cash. This tactic likely made them more cooperative, but it was also part of D'Angelo's sadistic game. D'Angelo took pleasure in toying with his victims' emotions. That October morning on Queen Anne Lane, he tied up his victims and rummaged through their drawers, collecting only $3 in change to maintain his ruse. He then separated the couple, dragging the girlfriend to the living room and leaving the boyfriend in the bedroom. After threatening to kill them if they tried to escape, he went to the kitchen. As he made a snack, his victims seized the opportunity to flee. The girlfriend's screams alerted neighbors, forcing D'Angelo to escape into the night. Though he vanished, he was furious. 2 botched assaults left his bloodlust unsatisfied. D'Angelo's frustration grew, and it wouldn't be long before it turned deadly. On December 29, 1979, he returned to Goleta. He spent the night ransacking houses, psyching himself up for his next attack. One couple saw a man run across their living room, finding their dog brutally punched, but nothing stolen. Footprints of Adidas sneakers and evidence of squatting were found at a nearby condo. The next day, December 30th, D'Angelo broke into the home of Dr. Robert Offerman and his girlfriend, Deborah Manning. He likely followed his usual method, shining a light in their faces and demanding money. Deborah quickly hid her rings under the mattress. D'Angelo then forced her to tie Robert's hands with twine. She left the knot loose, hoping he could break free. D'Angelo tied Deborah's hands behind her back, but with his attention diverted, Robert managed to slip his ties. He lunged at D'Angelo, who quickly fired 3 shots, hitting Robert in the chest. After a pause, D'Angelo shot Deborah in the back of the head. He fled, but none of the neighbors called the police despite hearing the gunshots. The next day, friends discovered Deborah and Robert's bodies. This marked a turning point for D'Angelo. No longer satisfied with robbery or rape, he now thirsted for murder. 3 months later, he moved to Ventura, California, targeting Lyman and Charlene Smith. On March 13, 1980, he broke into their home, tied them with a nautical knot, and assaulted Charlene. He then bludgeoned both to death with a fireplace log. Lyman's 12-year-old son found their bodies. The thrill of the successful murders kept D'Angelo satisfied for 5 months. On August 19, 1980, he struck again in Dana Point, killing newlyweds Keith and Patrice Harrington. He bound them, assaulted Patrice, and bludgeoned them to death, leaving behind few clues. In 1981, D'Angelo's life shifted with the birth of his daughter, temporarily pausing his crimes. However, on February 5, 1981, he returned to violence, attacking Manuela Wetun in Irvine. Finding her alone, he assaulted and killed her, leaving no evidence. On July 27, 1981, he targeted Sherry Domingo and Greg Sanchez in Goleta. Greg fought back, but D'Angelo shot him, then killed both. D'Angelo allegedly beat Greg Sanchez to death and then bludgeoned Sherry. The violent encounter rattled him, and he went 5 years without committing another murder. Former detective Paul Holes theorized that combative victims made D'Angelo too nervous to continue. During this break, he likely focused on family, struggling against his urges. However, like an addictive drug, his desire for control pulled him back. In 1986, the Golden State Killer resurfaced in Orange County. On May 4th, D'Angelo targeted Janelle Cruz, a teenager home alone. He waited for her boyfriend to leave, then broke in, assaulting and brutally brutally killing her. This was his most vicious attack, and dental records were needed to identify Janelle. The same year, D'Angelo became a father again and retreated to a quiet life in Sacramento. Janelle Cruz's murder was the last known crime attributed to the Golden State Killer, who had committed 13 murders, nearly 50 sexual assaults, and countless burglaries over 12 years. Dr. Michael Stone suggested that aging reduced D'Angelo's capacity for violence, as testosterone levels in prey drive diminish with age. Despite his inactivity, investigators doubted he had truly stopped and continued their pursuit. Living in the suburbs, D'Angelo's marriage crumbled. His third daughter's birth in 1989 led Sharon D'Angelo to file for divorce and a restraining order, though they remained legally married and lived separately. Neighbors saw D'Angelo's temper flare, and he became known as a moody old man. He found steady work as a truck mechanic and worked the night shift for 27 years until retirement. To his co-workers, he seemed like an average family guy. Save Mart workers never suspected their co-worker was the Golden State Killer, the man who terrorized the community in the 1970s. Even decades later, he tormented his past victims with threatening calls. David Watoon, whose wife was murdered in 1981, received unsettling calls for 30 years, revealing D'Angelo's continued desire for control. In 2001, DNA evidence linked the East Area Rapist to the Golden State Killer. This breakthrough inspired Detective Paul Holes, who pursued the case for 24 years. By 2017, Holes had turned to genealogy, hoping to use DNA databases like 23andMe. Despite doubts and ethical concerns, Holes persisted. Ventura County Crime Lab had a preserved sample from a 1980 assault, which they uploaded to GD Match under a fake profile. In January 2018, the DNA sequencing showed an extensive lineage. Genealogist Barbara Ray Venter created family trees, narrowing suspects down to 6, including 72-year-old Joseph James D'Angelo. Investigators staked out his home, eventually obtaining his DNA from a discarded tissue, which was a match. On April 24, 2018, D'Angelo was arrested at his suburban home. When taken into custody, he mentioned having a roast in the oven. D'Angelo was booked into the Sacramento County Jail and placed on suicide watch. His family was shocked and has since cooperated with the authorities. In January 2020, D'Angelo appeared in court, facing 26 counts of murder, assault, and kidnapping. Many of his crimes fell outside the statute of limitations, but survivors and their families attended hearings to confront him. Prosecutors seek the death penalty, despite Governor Gavin Newsom's stance against it. Police are also investigating other cold cases potentially linked to D'Angelo. The arrest of Joseph James D'Angelo brought some closure to his victims after his 12-year crime spree. However, it also serves as a grim reminder of the many lives he destroyed while living undetected for so long. Thanks for joining us on Secret Sleuths. If you enjoyed uncovering the dark mysteries with us, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more true crime stories. Stay curious, stay vigilant.